here. And try to speak up so that you know, is that working for you? All right. So I'm here to introduce the statewide review process for you, give a little context for...
Speak up.
Okay, I'm here to give a little bit of context for how the statewide process... All right. Go ahead.
Speaking to the top of the microphone.
Okay. Okay. That better? I'm not used to this. So, Kathy, the first slide. So I'm basically here to give you some context on the statewide level review process. This has gone through extensive Jefferson County process to get here. So I'll tell you more about from here forward. First, I'm going to talk about the Shoreline Management Act, state law that underlies the Shoreline Master Program development. Then I'll talk about the master program components, some of the broad outlines of how master programs are constructed. And then I'll talk about the statewide review process toward the end. So it's an important piece of our state history in terms of legislation was that in 1969, I believe it was, a citizen initiative movement led to what was called the Natural Shorelines Act being sent to the legislature. And that would have had the effect of not allowing any further development within 200 feet of Washington shorelines. The legislature took that citizen initiative and turned it into, revised it into the Shoreline Management Act, which was adopted in 1971. And so that is the underlying legislation for shoreline master programs. The Shoreline Act is basically a broad land use policy instrument that applies what the legislature considered important in managing the state's shorelines. And it's, some of the primary things are balancing the public interest with private property rights and balancing development with protecting natural resources. And because Washington has a very large amount of privately held shoreline areas relative to some states, the legislature also directed us in the Shoreline Act to promote, provide, protect public access to the shorelines, recognizing that across time, more and more people are going to be putting demands on a very limited resource. So each shoreline master program is developed locally. So if you think about how diverse the state of Washington is, both in terms of geography and in terms of local culture, that makes sense. You've got a very broad policy instrument. How do you make that work at a local level? So each community is given the task of setting up its own program. The shoreline master programs are more than plans. They're very complex documents. They include a lot of information. They have to cover a lot of ground. And you can go to the next one. The Shoreline Act describes a master program this way. Comprehensive use plan for a described area, and the use regulations together with maps, diagrams, charts, other descriptive material and text, statement of desired goals and standards. So the legislature said these are the basic pieces you need to regulate your shorelines. I'm not going to read all of this, but it talks about which Washington waterways are covered by the Shoreline Management Act. So protecting, it's one of the most important provisions in the Shoreline Act, as opposed to the Natural Shorelines Initiative that had been passed, is that it actively promotes reasonable, orderly development of shorelines. So it was recognized by the legislature. Shorelines are areas that are important for certain kinds of development, including residential, and that needs to be managed. And while you're managing the development of the shorelines, you need to protect the ecological resources. And again, provide for public access. The rule that sort of sets things up for shoreline master programs came in 2003 as a result of a settlement agreement after being initially ecology, filed a rule and it got shut, got legally challenged, and the settlement agreement led to the guidelines that we're working with now. And one of the fundamental principles in the guidelines is achieving no net loss of ecological functions as you continue developing the shoreline. So the actual language in the rule, master program shall contain policies that assure at a minimum no net loss of ecological functions to sustain natural resources. The starting point is the conditions as they exist today. One of the things that the legislature intended for us to do was, in updating master programs, look at current conditions on the shorelines and base what's in the master program on what's on the ground now. And recognizing that new development is going to occur. I wanted to point out that the Shoreline Act, explicitly, we have a lot of concerns about this. The Shoreline Act is based on the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution, and explicitly protects private property rights within it. It says coordinated planning is necessary in order to protect the public interest associated with the shorelines of the state, while at the same time recognizing and protecting private property rights consistent with the public interest. So that is explicitly woven into the state law, and the master programs likewise have to be consistent with that. Again, I already said this, the programs, the intent of the update process, which is applied statewide, is that a lot of the master programs that we have in effect today, they've been in effect since the 1970s, need to be brought up to date. A lot of things have changed over the last 30, 40 years, and so the legislature said, go forward and bring them up to date. And things change in terms of community values as well as, with the way the landscape is. So the 2003 guidelines included a schedule that said all Washington jurisdictions will have their master programs brought up to date by 2014. Basically adopted a 3-year time frame for each one. Ecology was provided money from the legislature to pass through to the local governments to help them do the work that's necessary to do the updating. And notably that one of the first across the finish line, if you will, where Jefferson County is getting close to right now, was the city of Fort Townsend, which adopted in 2007. So the Jefferson County program first came into effect in 1974. It was significantly updated in 1989. And the critical area ordinance was adopted in 2008. The critical area ordinance is under the Growth Management Act, which is a related but different state law. So their purposes and provisions overlap. And then the work on this Shoreline Master Program began around 2006. So it's been happening for the last 4 years. Shoreline Master Programs contain environment designation maps. That's where every stretch of the state shoreline, or the Jefferson County shoreline was looked at from a number of different lenses, and including current conditions of that shoreline, and including how it's developed, and including what kind of ecological features are in it, and all of those things were woven together in determining what was the appropriate designation for that shoreline based on what the guidelines criteria are. It contains goals, policies, and rules.